Okay, welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Johnny Craddock,
And I'm Darren Lundberg.
and today, Darren is one that I told you before that I felt like I've seen this movie before, and I
Yeah.
felt like I knew it, even though I had never seen it. And that movie is Apocalypse Now,
Mm.
1979, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, starring Marlon Brando, Martin Sheen, uh, Dennis Hopper, Robert Duvall, Lawrence Fishburne, and Harrison Ford has a cameo in there.
Hmm.
So we'll talk about that. But all-star cast, obviously. Very, very big movie, very important movie, I would
Yeah.
say. All about the Vietnam War and the horrors that we faced during that
Yeah. The horror,
time in
the
our
horror.
history.
Right, right. Yeah.
Exactly. But again, Francis Ford Coppola, we've been talking about him a lot during this 70s season. He's a very prolific director and he's made some really good movies, and this one is one of them. And I chose it because, like I said, I hadn't seen it and
Mm.
I always had wanted to watch it. I'd seen several clips here and there, and so I always felt like I didn't really need to watch it.
Yeah.
Um, so it was fun for me to sit down and watch the whole thing in its entirety and kind of get the whole experience. Um, so I just watched it like a week ago, so it's still fresh in my mind. And I have to say, like I did enjoy it. It's a not an easy movie to watch. It's
Mm.
it's for me it was long. I guess I watched the longer version, not knowing it.
Yeah.
So we can talk about that. But I it was something like 3 hours long, I think.
Oof, yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, a movie. This is a good movie. This was some of the stuff they did was pretty impressive. Like I was really impressed with a lot of the explosives and the just the special effects they did, and
Yeah.
and just the things they had to make the actors do, like the physicality, the things they had to endure. It was just like wow,
Yeah.
that was intense. It was really well done. So I was proud of them for making a good movie.
Okay, good.
Um, so anyway, let's talk really quick about well, my history isn't very long. Like I say, I
Mm.
just watched it. But what's your history with the movie? When did you
Well,
first see it?
again, this is one of those movies that you mentioned that it feels like you've seen it because you've seen clips, and some movies are just so in the zeitgeist because they hit in a particular way. I think a lot of it has to do with the controversy of the making of the movie and obviously the subjects it was tackling and the length and all the versions that were out. But this was a movie that's in the zeitgeist, that's in your mind, that you kind of absorb by osmosis, even though you haven't seen it. So you feel like you've
Yeah,
seen it because everybody's talked about it, right? So this is a movie that I thought, again, it was kind of like homework. It's like, well, I guess I have to watch this if I'm going to consider myself a film buff, right? So
hmm,
during that 90s is another one that I watched. I think I watched this after the Godfather movies. I watched this before The Conversation, which is one of my favorite Coppola movies. So yeah, this one was one of those ones that kind of lived up to the hype. Not so much that it's not a movie when you watch it, it's automatically the greatest movie ever made. I wouldn't even call it the greatest movie ever made now. I think I would call it the greatest, without a doubt, the greatest Vietnam movie ever made. Like in my
okay,
opinion, we'll talk about why. But it's one of those movies that it grows on you. And the more that I've watched it, I've maybe seen it half a dozen times by this point. But the more that I've watched it, it's one of those things that you pick up something new every time, or you appreciate something different. And yeah, it's a movie. I think when you think of like True Romance, the Saul Rubinek character, when the movie that he made, whatever, Coming Home in a Body Bag, and
yeah,
and Clarence is like, that's a freaking movie. You know what I mean?
yeah,
This is the movie that they're talking about, right? That's the kind of movie that they mean because it has the
right,
giant blockbuster. And there are shots and pieces of this movie. I'm like, how did they get this on film? You know
I
what I mean? Like,
know,
it's amazing. And they did it mostly by accident. Like they were just trying things and being very experimental. So yeah, it's just a movie that's been a part of me. And I think watching it this time, I don't usually make top tens or top 20s, but as an experience, it's in probably my top 20 experiences of movies, just the movies that stick with me and just, I don't know, like we'll talk about why and all that stuff. And
yeah,
again, it's not perfect there, but I think maybe that's the point. I don't want to be one of those guys that's like, oh, it's the flaws are part of the the greatness of it. I just we'll talk about why. I just think that the more surreal that this movie gets, the better it gets, and it builds to a point where it's like a, again, we talked about with Close Encounters, it's like symphonic. It kind of gets and builds to a certain point. But yeah,
how
that's my
many
history.
how many times have you seen it?
I think this would be my sixth time if I
Oh,
was
okay,
to
so
look at
quite a
it.
bit then.
Yeah, and again,
Okay,
and I'm including we'll talk about the Redux. I'm not a fan of that. I've seen that once, and I think I saw it maybe this the third time or the fourth time that I watched this movie, so I count that as one of the six. But
Okay.
I probably won't ever go back to that version again. It's just not, it's not worth it. We'll talk about why.
I will say when it first started, I was just kind of like just waiting for something to happen. And then the big explosions happen. Oh, okay. We're starting that way.
Yeah.
So I'd seen those clips too. I'd seen the explosions. I knew it was coming at some point in the movie. I
Mm,
didn't know it started like that. So, like I say, it was a good beginning to a movie, and that did pull me in. I was like, okay, this is going to be exciting, and
yeah.
so I was on board right away. And then when it jumps to the Martin Sheen stuff with him, kind of like is he in like a hotel in
Yeah.
barracks? Where's he at?
He's just in a hotel. He's just waiting for his orders. He's been called out there and he's
Okay,
just sitting, like not doing, which
okay.
is emblematic of the
So
war itself, really.
so now what I understand, like this that he actually did get high or something for this part of that part of the scene. He was actually really stoned out of his mind
He
in
wasn't,
real life.
that's more Hopper. He was, I think he was
Okay,
drunk. Like he was drunk out of
okay,
his mind. And it's to the
okay,
point where he smashes the mirror that wasn't on purpose and he cut
right.
himself so bad that he was bleeding.
Yeah, so that scene where he's holding the blood and wiping his face, that's his own blood.
That's his own blood. He just
Okay,
decided Coppola like was worried about him, but he they kept going, and Sheen was like, I think later he said it was kind of like an exorcism for his own alcoholism. So he was just trying to work a
okay.
lot of, but again, he was, it was, people were like worried. It was like, is he going to freak out? Like, is he going to start hurting people besides himself? They didn't know. So
Hmm.
that's the fact that it starts off with dangerous filmmaking like that is dangerous, but it's also kind of electric. It kind of puts you on edge, like, oh, this is going to happen. You know what I mean? So I don't know.
Yeah. It did remind me of the scene in Django Unchained where
Yeah.
Leonardo DiCaprio actually cuts himself, and that's
Right.
his
Right.
real blood on
Yep.
camera too. So knowing it's real blood makes it different.
Yeah. A
And
little bit.
when you know something's fake, you're like, oh, it's fake. It's not a big deal. But when it's actually, he's actually really bleeding, and then you're like, whoa, that's
Yeah.
that's something
Yeah.
different. But
Absolutely.
um, I did like that scene. We'll talk about Martin Sheen's performance in a minute, but and it was fun for me to see Harrison Ford show up in that little cameo in the beginning.
Yeah.
He was good. He's like we talked about in American Graffiti. He was good even when he was in these smaller roles. Like he
Hmm.
definitely, has star power, and no wonder he became what he became. Harrison Ford is
Yeah.
huge because he's got such as, charisma. There's such like you just want to watch him talk when he's on camera,
Hmm.
and that's something that not everyone has. And so
Yeah. You're
when he
like,
came out, I was like,
who's
oh,
that guy?
Harrison Ford.
Yeah, he sticks
Yeah,
out.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Um, but anyway, the movie moves on and it goes for this, the mission of finding is it what's the name of the
Kurtz.
character?
Yeah.
Kurtz,
Herman
yes.
Kurtz.
Yeah. And I was on board most of the time. But like I say, I watched the longer version. So there were
Yeah.
moments when I kind of tuned out because I got a little bit bored. But there was the big payoff in the end, and it did, all wrap up nicely for me. So at the end, I was like, that was a fun movie to watch. It was a good experience.
Okay.
Um,
Good.
but because I watched the longer version, you didn't I didn't tell you that until after the fact. But what are some of the differences between the original theatrical version and the version that I saw?
Well, again, it's 49 minutes longer, and it's a fascinating story because, like we mentioned in Close Encounters, Spielberg always tinkering with Close Encounters as opposed to his other movies because I think he took that personally. Like, I know Coppola's messed with The Godfather, and he's made different versions of that. But again, the different versions they had of this, like the preview version, like the work in progress version, the version, I'm not sure if it's the same as any one of those, but they debuted at Cannes and won the Palme d'Or, all that. And then he released the movie again. The movie starts without logos. It just goes right in. You get images and the whoop, whoop, whoop of the helicopter blades. And then Martin Sheen upside down. It starts off very surreal without all those. You're like, oh, I guess we're skipping all that stuff, right? So, all the different versions and the fact that he kept tinkering with it. The version that you saw, he was finally able, working with Walter Murch, who we've talked about before. I'm a big fan of his with Return to Oz. I know he directed that. We talked about him at length. But as a sound guy, they were able to re-edit the movie from scratch, like take the negative and just because it was rushed. Like Coppola had to get it out by a certain point, right, by Khan, I believe. But like, so they re-edited everything. They got like Martin Sheen and Timothy Bottoms, and I think Duvall came in and they did ADR to kind of get the new dialogue and stuff like that to cover up patches. And they reassembled the movie from scratch. So the plantation scene, which takes up like half an hour, that's added. There's a extended Playboy Playmate sequence where you find out that their helicopter has run out of gas and it's landed, and they barter, I think, sex with the bunnies for two barrels of gas or something like that. And there's just extra stuff after Mr. Clean is killed. That's in the plantation scene, I believe, where they bury him, which that's the one addition maybe I could have used. And then there's just other stuff. I think at the end when you see Kurtz, there's another scene before Willard is released and nursed back to health. He's in some kind of box car, and the Kurtz character opens up the door and he reads him a Time magazine article. And again, so there's just a bunch of stuff like that. And I'm sorry that because I texted you, I'm like, have you watched it yet? And you're like, yeah, I have. And I was like, which version did you watch? And you said the 3 hour one. Oh, I'm so sorry. Because I just think that, and we'll talk about it some more, the movie is a surreal experience. It's about the experience of being in Vietnam and what it was like to be over there. And so when you have a series of vignettes and like they're all surreal and you get it like in the theatrical cut, but then when you add 50 minutes and it's just making the same points again and just with different characters, it's like, I don't need this. Like, I don't know if the movie needed to be 2 hours and 25 minutes long or 2.5 hours. It definitely didn't need to be 3 hours. You know what I mean? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
because you're making, like all war movies, you're making the same kind of points. And I don't, again, cut out other stuff too and have the plantation. It's just weird that I'm used to does that make sense? Like used to the theatrical
Yeah.
version. And then you add all this other stuff that's like, I don't need this. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I
So
can see having those scenes if it's necessary for like some kind of I don't know if you're trying to show off a something, some kind of camera, some kind of new technique or something. If you're trying to, make it, but then again, this, like you say, this movie makes that point over and over again, and
yeah.
you don't really need all that stuff. It's kind of like the what you always say about Requiem for a Dream. You always say, "Yeah, I get it. Drugs are bad." You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
how much you keep telling me the same point over and over again. So
Right, right.
I can see that. But I mean, though that was the part of the stretch movie where I did get bored. So maybe if I had watched the shorter version, maybe I wouldn't have gotten so bored.
Right. And did you watch the shorter version again, or did you
I didn't
just
have time. I
okay,
didn't have
okay.
time. So,
It might be again, this is a movie I don't and you've said before that some movies you don't really feel like watching immediately, but the next time you do watch this movie, just see if it gives you a different feeling. Because I
yeah.
just thought, like I said, the movie's not perfect. I think the movie as the theatrical is overlong in places. It does dip, even though that, it mimics the experience of being out there kind of. But
I will say this.
yeah.
Sorry,
No,
but
no, no, you're good.
when it was over, I did have the feeling that I wanted to watch it again just to kind of study it more and be
Yeah.
like, that was an experience, but I kind of want to this time just study it and not just experience. I was my first time seeing it, so I
Yeah.
was just kind of like letting it kind of wash over me.
Right.
So this next time I watch it, I do want to kind of dive deeper.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. Like, and you and I are alike. Like, I don't really care about the techniques the first time I watch them. If they stand out, great. Like, that's fine. I appreciate that. But I'm
Yeah.
more of a so if the story and the characters involved, that's what I'm looking for first. And so when you said wash over, that's exactly the first time I watched it. I was like, oh, that was really interesting. I mean, you can see people's arcs, you can see the things that people are going through. But then when you go through it again, you're able to, like, again, the Kilgore sequence, I was really able to sit back and go, this is just incredible. This is incredible filmmaking. And you don't really notice that at first because I think you're kind of absorbed in what's happening. You don't notice the aesthetics.
Mhm. Well, I'm glad you brought Kilgore up because I want to talk about Robert Duvall.
Okay.
As I experienced this movie, like Martin Sheen, he's kind of like just the everyman. He's the guy that he's just the observer. We're kind of watching everything through his eyes,
Yeah.
and for some reason, I found his character kind of uninteresting. I wasn't really on board with him so much. I was
Hmm.
still on board with the story, but I wasn't really kind of like, I didn't really care much about him because he was kind of bland in a way. Do you know what I mean? Does that
Yeah.
make sense? Like,
Yeah. Hmm.
it wasn't really that interesting to watch. But when Kilgore came on screen and Robert Duvall showed up and he just had this presence and he just like sucked me in and I was like, wow. because I'm not really that big of a Robert Duvall fan. I mean, I like him. There's a lot of stuff he does that I really don't like. So when
Mhm.
he was that good in this one, I was like, wow, like that's what I want from Robert Duvall. I want a performance like that.
Mhm.
And so he gave it to me, and I was just, man, that was the best part of the movie, in my opinion.
Well, again, like we talked about him as Tom Hagen in the Godfather movies, right?
And
And
secondhand
his,
lines too.
yeah, his in Second Line Lines, he's more Kilgore in that than he is in Godfather. You know what I mean? He has more life to him. But with Godfather, Tom Hagen's a very different character. He's just the quiet guy that sits in the back and kind of reacts to
Hmm.
stuff, and he plays that great. Like you don't. He's not the standout until you sit and you watch him. You're like, oh, he plays quiet really, really well. Like he's really selling that character. But when you're used to that, and then he pops up in this and he's just on fire from like the first line of dialogue
Yeah,
that he has, it's like, whoa, this is going to be an experience. And when he
yeah.
leaves the movie, you kind of want him to be in it more. That's
Yeah,
how much of a
you feel
standout he
his
is.
presence leave. I was gonna say that. You feel that. You feel,
Yeah.
what a difference it made.
Right. And that's a lot of the thing is like, if you feel like a movie is homework, and that's one thing, but sitting down and watching this movie, yeah, there's the filmmaking aspect, but it's really funny. Like a lot of stuff, and especially in that Kilgore sequence, it's really funny. And it points up,
Yeah,
it's not just the pointing up the war stuff, but I like when they're like, why do you guys sit on your helmets? It's like, oh, so we won't get shot in the balls. And then the chef character, he's like, ha, and then he puts the thing under he sits. That's
yeah,
funny. Kilgore
yeah,
is funny because he's the sergeant, he's in charge, and he's like, no, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to carry you over here. And then he goes, and one of those guys comes over and says, hey, that's that famous surfer like that from California. He's like, what? And he goes over there and he's like, oh, this is great. Like, and so he breaks down, and that's what he cares about, and like he
yeah.
just wants to surf. And but that ties in with the again, the whole point of the movie is that you've got these vignettes. When they're on the boat, they're kind of able to process stuff and be kind of normal. But when they step on off the boat, every time they step off, they encounter like the surrealism. They encounter the pointlessness. They encounter all
Hmm.
the gray stuff as opposed to black and white stuff. And when they run into Duvall, that's the big or Kilgore, that's the big point of the movie, is that this guy is like he's been out there so long that he's trying to turn it into something different. He's trying to make it home. They cook steaks,
Yeah,
things like that. They have
yeah.
barbecues, and they
Yeah,
do the
bonfires on the beach. Yeah,
yeah. He becomes he's a kind of a mirror of Kurtz himself. He's power hungry. He's in charge, so he wears that Stetson, the hat. He rushes in the battle playing the Flight of the Valkyries, Wagner stuff like that. He's a showboat, and the
yeah,
funny, they're on the helicopter and he's like drinking coffee. I thought that was really funny. But
yeah,
what's really great too, and that's what I mean, the performance is not just great, it ties in with what is being said to us, because they're caught up in the rah John Wayne gung ho kill everybody, so they're decimating. We get that shot of that town, and it's like the kids in the school, and it's like the women that are, and the people that are trying to get their cows or their bulls off the road, and so they're normal lives. And then these guys come charging in, strafing the place, and they're just killing everybody. And when that woman throws the Kong lady throws her hat into the helicopter and explodes it, and he's like, freaking savages. It's like, and it makes you laugh in spite of yourself, because they're being savages. It's like, why are you saying that about them when you're acting the same way, just in a
yeah,
different kind of a different level? So I don't know, his performance just really ties in with what's being said. I think that's what's amazing too. It's not just the
yeah,
performance, it's the movie with the performance.
yeah. So we can both agree that Robert Duvall was
Oh,
probably the standout performance.
yeah,
And of
yeah.
course, he has the famous line, I love the smell of napalm in the morning. That was, I was waiting for that line.
Mhm.
So I was like, all right, there it is.
You know what? I also love his line. It's at the end of that monologue where he goes off that stuff and it smells like victory. And then he has a moment where he stops and he goes, someday this war will end. And that's it. His mind wanders and he walks off, and you're like, huh. So it leaves you thinking like, what is, that was interesting. What is being said here? And it makes you think about everything that you've just seen, and how to kind of
Yeah,
appreciate it. I don't know. Great, great stuff.
yeah, yeah, really good. So I mentioned Martin Sheen. What's your thoughts on Martin Sheen?
Well, we kind of talked about it off here. I agree that he's kind of, when you compare him to Duvall and even Brando in a way, there's a reason that Sheen, even though he's the main character, he's the third build, in the movie after Brando and Duvall. He's us. Like, he's our insight character, right? He's going crazy at the beginning. I like the fact that he starts off kind of like off kilter, and he's starting off at a place that he's not right. I think
Mhm.
he has, again, he's just kind of reactive. He's just sitting there going along and he's reading the dossiers on Kurtz. He's kind of getting more interested in him and stuff like that, which is a very cool tie-in to the Conrad novel, The Hearts of Darkness, that this movie is based off of. That's exactly what happens. Like the character in that, he's what is his name? Marlowe instead of Willard. He's just on the boat and he keeps reading stuff about Kurtz and getting more and more interested in him and stuff. So that's a cool tie in there. He has moments where he's interesting. Like I like the part where they're at. I'm going to get it wrong. They go to where the USO trip is with the Playboy Playmates when he kind of trades or whatever. And what's the place anyway? So he has that guy, How Fat, where the guy's like not really. We got to get here. And it's like I don't want to deal with you. Like I don't want. And he keeps like avoiding the topic. And Willard gets so upset that he like grabs him and like shoves
Mhm.
him and throws him aside. And he's like, just give us the stuff. Like he's got
Yeah, right.
moments of where he kind of breaks out of the dullness, like his ambivalence or whatever.
Mhm.
And then I like the part during that scene where they just decimate that boat of the Vietnamese people just because it's a terrifying, horrifying, disgusting sequence. And
Yeah,
at the end, when the woman that was going for the puppy, like she's still alive, and Chief is like, "We got to get her to a medic." He's like, "No," and he shoots her dead. And it's like, "I told you not to stop."
yeah,
Right? He's
yeah.
kind of become, and then he has that monologue where he's like, "Well, the men are going to look at me different, but now I feel like I know Kurtz better than anybody." Right? Because he's
Mhm.
had that same, and he's identifying with him more. So he has that interesting part. And then again, he's just reactive for the rest of the movie. He just kind of says stuff. He's like, "No, I'm in charge. We're going to keep going." Says that to Chief or whatever. And he doesn't really come alive. Again, you kind of ask yourself when he's dealing with Kurtz, it's like, what does Kurt see in this guy? You know what I mean? Why is it Willard showing up that Kurtz is like, oh, you're going to be the guy that's going to relieve my pain, right? You're going to be the guy that's going to kill me. You're the next. What? Because I was like, what is it about? I'm not sensing that he's the next in line. I think Kurt just kind of recognizes something in him. So when Willard finally does something and he emerges from the lake, kind of from the murky depths or whatever, I
Yeah,
think that's when Sheen comes alive. But you're right, that's especially in the Redux version, you're waiting like 2 hours and 40 minutes before he finally does something of
yeah.
value, right? So I get it. It is dull. I think that's kind of what we're supposed to feel because he's like Seinfeld, where George and Elaine and Kramer are the goofy ones, and he's just kind of reacting to
But then again, too, I mean, it's he's the one on the mission, and so when
them.
you're laser focused on a mission, then
Yeah,
you kind of have that like that drive or that like kind of like
right.
you don't really have much else to focus on but the mission. So,
Yeah. So
um,
I think he's great for what he's got that, like I said, he's got moments where you can feel that personality, the anger come out, but it doesn't actually happen until the end. I think, but that ties in with what you're right. He's on a mission. That's all
yeah,
he's focused on.
it was also fun to be like he looks just like Charlie Sheen.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah, so that was cool. But yeah, so Martin Sheen, Robert Duvall.
Hmm.
Okay, Marlon Brando. Like, I mean, I know he's Marlon Brando, and I know his presence is felt throughout the entire movie, mainly because Martin Sheen's character is, talking about the character and reading on about him and going on and on about this guy he's got to kill.
Hmm.
Um, and so you feel that presence throughout the movie, but he's barely in the movie.
Yeah.
And when he does show up, I was kind of let down. I was kind of like, I don't know if that was what I was hoping that performance would have been. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what I was expecting, but I don't think it was that. And so I was like, okay, like,
Yeah.
I know people like praise Marlon Brando like crazy, but is he really as good as we think he is? You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it was a letdown for me. But what do you think?
I don't think you're wrong at all. And I think that's the attitude that a lot of people have about him. I think by this point in his career, he'd become more of a presence. Like he was kind of done. Like I've already done my part. I don't have to show off anymore. Like, why do I have to show off to you? I'm Marlon freaking Brando. You know what I mean? So we can't discount him because he was the guy that started kind of the method acting, like on the waterfront. There's this particular scene where Eva Marie Saint drops her glove. It was on accident, and he picks it up and plays with it, and they keep the scene going. And that's a kind of an off script kind of thing that was amazing. I know it sounds kind of frivolous now, but it was amazing at the time because we just weren't used to that stuff. So we can't count him out for how much of a presence he was. And in
Hmm.
The Godfather, I think again he's a presence, and he has in The Godfather, I think we talked about it. He has the moments of warmth that make that character worth it. You know what I mean? Even though he's not really in it because he disappears for most of it. But you're right. I think he'd made Superman by this time. And Superman, when he showed up for that movie, and we might have more of a conversation on this in the future, but he was just reading off cue cards. Like he refused to memorize his lines. And so, and he had but he gave off the aura of, oh, this is Marlon Brando. Like obviously he knows something that we don't, just like you're saying, right? And
Yeah.
when he showed up for,
Wasn't he top billed in Superman too?
yes, he
Like he
was,
had top billing? Yeah.
just like in this one, and Robert Duvall is billed over Martin Sheen. It's kind of the same thing. When he showed up for this, he was about a month late. Like Dennis Hopper has a story where they had scenes together. Like Dennis Hopper was like, if I'm in this movie, I just want one line of dialogue with the great Marlon Brando because I've looked up to him since I was a kid. He made me rethink what acting was, right? So he was waiting for about a month and a half on that set before Brando even showed up. And Brando showed up overweight. I think he was 300 pounds. When you see him in this movie in silhouette, that's not him. That's somebody else. Like they wanted him to be giant, but not like Orson Welles in his later life kind of
Okay.
overweight, right? And he didn't know his lines by then. Like he hadn't read the book, like he hadn't done any research. He didn't get along with Hopper. So even Hopper was kind of disillusioned by him. Like imagine being Dennis Hopper and having Brando as an idol and showing up and just having Brando scream at him because you're a nothing. Why are you telling me how to act? I think there was some kind of miscommunication. How would you feel if you showed up and your idol was like that? You would be
Yeah.
disillusioned, right?
Yeah.
It's funny that kind of ties in with the theme of the movie. It kind of feeds that performance of Hopper's. But what's what you said? Kurtz is such a presence. You see him in silhouette in photos, you see pictures of him, you hear Willard talk about him constantly. So he's a presence. So when he shows up, it's more the filmmaking, it's the Vittorio Storaro cinematography that just the way that it keeps him in shadow. I thought that was
Hmm.
so interesting. It didn't reveal his face for the longest time.
Yeah. I actually like that. I thought it could have revealed a little bit sooner, but I did like how they did that.
Yeah. So I think the filmmaking sells the performance more than Brando sells the performance. And again, with the Redux, when he has that long scene where he's surrounded by the villagers, whatever, and these kids keep coming into the boxcar where Willard is, and Brando has to move him out of the way, and he's just reading
Hmm.
this article. To me, the way that he's presented in this movie, Kurtz is presented, it's just enough in the theatrical version. It's just enough to make him mysterious, to make him kind of, you doubt him, or maybe you don't, or you're just kind of, you buy into his aura, or you don't, that kind of thing. But the filmmaking is what sells him more than the performance itself. So by adding more of the performance in the Redux, it takes away that mystique from him. You know what I mean? Like, why
Hmm.
does he just let Willard kill him and just chop him to pieces? Like it's the filmmaking that hits you more than his performance. So I don't know if that was Coppola trying to compensate for Brando just not giving a shit. You know what I mean? But it's like you're right. I mean, he's more of a presence in this than I think. And that was the criticism. Is Brando just in this to sell like the vapid dialogue? I don't think that's it. I think Brando sells it's the vapidness of what he's saying that's like he's lost his mind, but there are kernels of truth in what the colonel's saying. You know what I mean? Like, and so
Yeah.
you get
Yeah.
that. But again, it's more of like I said, it's more of an identity or more of a presence than an actual performance.
Yeah. Well, I will say this too. I mean, I'm done with Marlon Brando, but you mentioned Dennis Hopper, and I
Yeah.
will say he was fun to watch. Like
Yeah.
when I actually forgot he was in it until he showed up. Like, oh yeah, Dennis Hopper's in this too.
Yeah.
So
His
I kind of
voice,
got
as soon as
excited
you
again.
hear him, you're like, oh, that's Dennis Hopper, right? Like
Yeah,
you get
yeah,
him.
and
Yeah.
he had such energy
Yeah.
in his scenes, and he just brought this. It just felt different, and so it was a relief to have him on screen and to have something else to look at.
Yeah.
Because at that point I'd been kind of like, okay, when's this? This is going on for a long time now. When's it going to end? And then
Yeah.
he shows up, and it was just a refreshing,
Inject
change of
some
pace.
energy. Right. Right.
Yeah, and so I really enjoyed Dennis Hopper's performance.
What I don't remember specific lines of dialogue. I wish I wrote them down. But the fact that again he was high, he was high as again high as shit when they were filming the movie. Like he was just like coked out of his mind. I guess you want to say. So him, but it feeds in the performance, right? He's so hallucinatory and he's just not there and he keeps just rambling. He can't put together a cohesive sentence. Like he goes on and on without actually having a period on what he's saying, right?
Yeah,
But every now and then he'll have some nuggets where you see the lucidity slip through, like, oh, you've seen the head, right? Sometimes he loses his temper, but we all do. He's the first to mention it, you know what I mean? So he's got these little nuggets of, oh, this is crazy, but isn't this all crazy? I think so. It's you're right. He has
yeah,
that energy
yeah.
that comes back and kind of lifts you up a little bit.
yeah, it kind of revitalizes the movie at that time when it needs it. So
Yeah.
it was like I say, it was good.
And like I said to you in a text, it's like when you said, I think you texted me and said, I really like Robert Duvall in this. I'm like, this movie is kind of a series of actors just showing up and like owning the place and then walking off. I think Hopper's
Hmm.
another example of that.
Yeah. And one actor that I didn't even recognize. I mean, I read the cast list, so I knew he was going to be in it, and I kept waiting for him. And then when I realized when it was over, oh wait, he was the guy on the boat. That's
Yeah.
Lawrence Fishburne. I
Yeah.
didn't even recognize him. I mean, he was so young back then. I
Right.
mean, he didn't look like Lawrence Fishburne to me.
He was
But
14, I think. I think he lied about his age to
oh,
get
okay,
hired on. So
because
he was 14 years old. Yeah.
in the movie he's supposed to be 17, right? That's what they
Yeah.
say he's 17. But yeah,
Right. Right.
another good performance. I thought Lawrence Fishburne was good. I thought he was a good addition to the film.
Yeah. His death, again, we're spoiling things for people that haven't seen the movie, obviously, but obviously when he dies it's a shock. It's during that the flare fight or whatever when the machine gun fire goes off and there's just a quick shot of him reacting to being hit. But every now and then the movie, even though it's surreal, it would hit like these cliches. So him listening to the tape from his mom, and as he's dying, you hear the mom saying, "Oh, well, just watch out for bullets, and we're really proud of you." I'm like, that was kind of a cliched part. That's the kind of thing that a lot of war movies had done before, and a lot of movies were going to do since.
Okay.
But again, we talked about this during the some episode, and we mentioned Aaron Sorkin, how his dialogue is so intellectual that you're kind of lost, but you like the rhythms of it. But then
Hmm.
he'll stop and he'll go, "Oh, you should try some oregano. I heard that works pretty good." That
Yeah.
it brings you back. And, oh, I know that. And so it humanizes these points for you, right? And so I think this movie is so surreal that I think sometimes we need those cliche parts to kind of ground us and go, okay, this is kind of a war movie. It's kind of saying the same thing. So even though that's been done before and been done a ton since, I still think this, it was effective. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, cliches become cliches because they are tried and true and they work and they are
Yeah.
effective. So when something
Right.
like that is that effective, you're going to use it. And so
Yeah.
I actually enjoyed that. So
Okay. Okay.
I
Good.
was thought that made a lot of sense.
Okay.
Like I said, it did humanize the character. So
Yeah.
is there any other actors in the film that we want to talk about that we haven't yet?
Everybody's good on the boat, right? Timothy Bottoms is good. I'm gonna get his name wrong. The guy that plays Chief, he's really good. I want to find his name. I don't want to just do that. What is his name here? Chief is. Sorry, this shouldn't take me so long. Why can't I find his name? Anyway, I feel bad. Where is he in here? Lawrence Fishburne. Why is he? No, Chief Petty Officer Albert Hall. Sorry, Albert. I'm sorry that I did that. He's really good. Um, Again, I don't know if he maybe has he been in other stuff since this movie came out. I'm not trying to make excuses, but
I'm not sure either.
yeah, I don't think. Well, Devil in a Blue Dress, Courage Under Fire is what I'm saying. Malcolm X. So I'm sorry, man. Like Albert Hall, you're a good actor. You did a great job. Like as Chief, he's great. So, but they're just those are characters that they just kind of do what they need to do. They're not really standouts, but we do. And again, surreal. Him getting hit with the spear of all things, like they're killed by savages or in savage ways. That kind of, and he doesn't believe it himself. I think that was really effective. So again, a lot of really good actors with a lot of really good parts and moments.
Yeah, is Scott Glenn in this movie?
He is, but he doesn't say anything. Like he's the other
Okay.
colonel or whatever that traveled up river and then just joins him. I think
Oh, okay.
again, does that have something to do with Kurt's? Kurtz doesn't trust that guy to kill him. You know what I mean? He doesn't.
Yeah,
We don't see like maybe he did. Maybe Kurtz did trust him up. Maybe he did put him to the same thing that he put Willard through. I don't know, but like it's
yeah,
weird
maybe.
seeing Scott Glenn show up and then not say anything. Did he? I don't remember him saying more on the Redux version either. So maybe just the presence. One of
Okay.
those things where it's like, well, I'm glad I was in that movie, even though I didn't say anything.
One thing that I wanted to say that we didn't talk about Francis Ford Coppola, and we have mentioned this before with other movies that he's directed that we've had on our podcast, and that is just kind of like um the dissolves and the transitions that he does from scene to
Yeah,
scene. And there's a lot of that in this, and I know that's because of of the disillusion, because of the, psychedelicness of the time and all that. And
yeah.
I get all that. And I think for the most part it worked. But halfway through the movie it fades to black and then it's like black for like 10, 15 seconds. Like it's long. And I was like, what's this intermission? And then like
Yeah.
it came back in.
Was
And
it after the part where Willard shoots the woman, the wounded woman?
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Because that's where it's split on the
And
disc, on the complete
yeah.
dossier disc that I have.
So is that what that was? Just intermission? Or was that
Yeah, I think so.
okay? Because that was a long stretch of just nothing.
Mhm.
And so I was a little confused there.
Well,
But
I think it might have to tie in with the surrealness of maybe he just thought that would, because the credits even again for the roadshow version that he had, they didn't have credits. They just had a booklet. Like it just faded out and said Apocalypse Now, and then that was it. There were no end credits.
okay.
And so for the
Okay.
version that was released to theaters, he did add credits back into it over a black screen, but they're spread out. So there, I think the Redux version does just the plain old thing where it has the scroll. But the
Okay.
theatrical version that I've watched, it'll show credits, but then there'll be big pauses in between, and then they'll come up and they'll be fast, and then they'll stop again, and then so even the end credits are surreal. So I think that might
Hmm.
maybe he just thought that tied in with the surrealism of the movie.
Okay. Or it's just a Coppola thing.
Yeah, either way.
So you mentioned before we started filming or recording that you wanted to talk about the writing. So what is it about the writing that you wanted to bring up?
Well, again, it's not really writing. It's more of just vignettes and like different, because when they were making the movie, it was just they were improvising a lot of the time. And so they were just, because they were so over budget, I think there was a typhoon that kind of delayed them by 6 months, stuff like that. I think they started shooting this in 1974, and
Oh
then they
wow.
got delayed, and then they had to come back, and they were done in 77 or 78, and it took that long to edit. So it was, that's
Oh
why there's
wow.
a controversy to this movie, because that people were just so enthused and so studying the making of it because it was making headlines. But the
Okay.
writing, I don't know, I think it works. The writing is impactful because it doesn't say everything outright. The Redux version does. Like when they go and they had that second scene with the Playboy playmates, one of the playmates goes on about how she's disillusioned. And I'm like, I don't need that, guys. You're just another character that's telling us the same thing that we're experiencing, not in
Mhm.
words. Like you get that the other characters are disillusioned, but they never say, hey, I'm disillusioned. Like one of the playmates actually says, I'm disillusioned, or I don't get this. I don't understand anything. It's like, okay, you don't need to vocalize it or literalize it
Yeah, yeah.
being said. So the writing is more of a non-writing is what I wanted to talk about. It's not long speeches besides Brando's, and even then he's just rambling. He's just talking about nothing with little moments of truth that you're like, huh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. So it's just a case of the dialogue saying just so much that you get it without overplaying its hand, which again I think is why the Redux version doesn't work, because it doesn't feel the same as the rest of the movie. It overplays its hand a little bit.
Would you have rather it not been so improvised and more scripted?
Hmm. I honestly, I don't think so. And we'll kind of talk about how, as a Vietnam movie, this is the Vietnam movie to beat all Vietnam movies, because we've mentioned this word a lot, the surrealism of it, the pointlessness of it, the fact that Coppola kind of started going nuts. You know what I mean? The fact that he wasn't getting along with Brando, the fact that they had so many delays, the fact that, he was just so overconfident when he was doing press for the movie, like him saying, this movie isn't about Vietnam. This is Vietnam, like just being really pompous and stuff. So the making of the movie ties in with the theme of the movie and what the movie's saying to you. I think that's what makes it so fascinating, is they didn't mean to go crazy. They just went to shoot a movie, but they had the same experience of just losing their minds because nothing was going the way that they even as hard as they planned, it didn't work out the way they wanted it to. And I think it's interesting because Coppola, he one of his models for the movie was the Aguirre Wrath of God. It's the Werner Herzog movie. And I think because that again is about a movie about conquistadors that are kind of floating upriver and encountering like all this weird war stuff, which is a
Okay.
fascinating, haunting movie. But there's another movie called Fitzcarraldo that Werner Herzog also made about a guy that decides he wants to bring an opera house to an uncultured country. So instead of building it, he's trying to get the locals to lift the boat over a hill. And Werner Herzog, when he was shooting the movie, he wanted it so realistic that that's what he did. He wanted his crew and the to lift the boat over this mountain, and so it kind of tied in with the craziness of the that movie. And
Hmm.
then they Herzog didn't get along with Klaus Kinski, and then because the movie was so crazy, Fitzcarraldo ended up having a Les Blank documentary made from called Burden of Dreams, where they show you like the making of the movie and how nuts it was. And the Apocalypse Now also had a documentary. I think Eleanor Coppola shot some stuff on set called Hearts of Darkness, a filmmaker's apocalypse, where they go through the same thing. The shoot was so crazy that they had a documentary, and it's a fascinating story all by itself. So if you haven't seen that, I would definitely recommend that as a
Hmm.
documentary. But that's kind of a long-winded way of saying I think the improvisatory or whatever the word is, the way that they did that, it just for this movie it works because it's crazy and nothing makes sense. And I think the making of it, having that tie in with the theme of the movie, I think that's a big part of what makes this movie so stand out
I think
and
that's
makes it kind of
interesting too, how in the middle of making the film, like what's that saying? Life imitates art or
yep,
art
yep, yep.
imitates life. That's
Mm-hmm.
interesting that that's kind of like um is what happens to them. So that's
Yep.
that's a nice little trivia nugget you had there.
Right, right. Well, what do you think? Do you feel like it needed to be more scripted or
I prefer the scripted over the improvised, but like you, I would agree that I think it works for this film, and I
yeah,
think I don't know, you can tell when it is scripted. You can tell like the scenes with the colonels and the generals and stuff, and at the end and everything that it is more scripted there, but basically the bulk of it is not, and
yeah,
so. And I think that kind of ties into why maybe for me I kind of tuned out here and there because it was kind of like there was nothing kind of like there was nothing anchoring me, nothing grabbing me on and pulling me along with it. It was just kind of like meandering and kind of
yeah.
wandering, you know what I mean?
Kind of
But
pointless in some
I
parts. Yeah.
still think it worked though. It did not work. So
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. That's a good way of saying it.
yeah. We talked about our favorite Vietnam films. Is this one of your favorites? Is this the epitome of Vietnam films, or what do you
Yeah,
think?
I think we mentioned that this is to me this is the Vietnam War movie. I don't know if this is the greatest war movie ever made. I think if I was to pick one, because I'm more of a what lasts, what has repercussions in other movies. The 1931 on All Quiet on the Western Front, I think might be the greatest war movie ever made because almost every war movie after it has tried to copy it in some way. The disillusionment, the soldiers kind of losing their minds, the characters dying, and just the pointlessness of everything. So I wouldn't call Apocalypse Now the greatest war movie ever made, but if you're looking at World War I movies, World War II movies, Gulf War movies, stuff like that, this is the Vietnam movie. And you can look at Platoon, which is very personal because Oliver Stone went through that, right? You can look at The Deer Hunter because that's about, even though that's not specifically, they never come out and say it's about Vietnam like we talked about, right? It's about the
Mhm.
disillusionment of coming home and how you're different after that. So there's different Born on the 4th of July, the Ron Kovic story, stuff like that. Hamburger Hill. We can mention Full Metal Jacket, which we've talked about
Mhm.
before with Phoenix, right? They all have they're I mentioned all those because they're all after a different thing. They're all disillusionment, but they're all doing it from a different perspective. But I just think as a whole, I think Platoon is a very personal, kind of bottled story. And it's the same thing with Born on the 4th of July. So they're about one particular character. What makes this the Vietnam movie to beat Vietnam movies is, you and I didn't serve in Vietnam. But if you're doing the research of it, this was not World War One. This was not World War Two. This was a war that America went into because they shoved their nose into it. They were like, "Oh, we see communism spread around Vietnam and China. Let's go in there and fix it because that's our business for whatever reason. We're so great that we're going to go in there." And we were outgunned and outmanned and outmatched because we didn't know how to deal with that stuff because I think we were fighting an idea versus fighting an army. Like it wasn't just like fighting the Nazis, you know what I mean? Where that's pure evil. You're trying to stop them. Here, you're trying to fight communism. It's different. You don't just march in and shoot communism in the face. You know what I mean? That's not how it works. And so, all these soldiers out there, again, when the US got involved, they just thought they could make a difference. They thought they could just, again, shove their nose in everything and make the place greater, even though it's not their business. They were fighting their own war, stuff like that. And we lost like 55,000 American soldiers. And it was just nobody knew what they were doing and what they were fighting. And it was just these, you get lost. Like you in the movie, you run into parts where there's no COs, there's nobody in charge, right? You have moments where you have the USO tour show up. And I thought it was interesting that the Playboy Playmates tour dressed like cowboys and Indians, which is a mirror to the colonialism that was happening in Vietnam at the time, right? So I just think as when you like we talked, like I mentioned to you, neither one of us served in the Vietnam War, but all the research that you do about it, this feels like what it was, and people say this too. It feels like what Vietnam was like. It didn't make any sense. It was crazy. Why are we doing this? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And that
yeah,
ties in with what Willard's doing. He's like, we're killing everybody. Why am I going? Why am I being sent on a mission to kill this other guy who's just doing
yeah,
his job, and he's just not listening to people. He's gone nuts. Like it's like trying to hand out speeding tickets at the Indy 500. Right? It's
yeah,
none of it makes sense, and I think that's why it's, to me, it's the Vietnam movie, because it's not just, oh, look at what these characters are going through. It's what everybody's going through. You get the experience of it. I don't know, what Vietnam movies, what is your experience with those?
well, now having experienced it and seen it, and I think they did some really just amazing work as far as like just immersing you in the story and making you feel like you're part of it.
Mhm.
Because when you're on the boat with them, like when they say don't get off the boat, you're like, yeah, don't get off the freaking boat, man. Like
Yeah.
stay on the boat. So I don't know. I think they did an amazing job, and
Mhm.
I haven't seen anything else like it. I do love Platoon though.
Yeah, I
Platoon
know you
just
do.
kind of like sat with me for years after I saw that movie, and I couldn't get out of my mind. Another one, Full Metal Jacket. We
Mhm.
talked about that too. Like I loved the first half. Second half,
Yeah.
like I say, I get kind of bored with the war stuff because the same point gets made over and over again.
Mhm.
But and the same kind of stuff happens in Full Metal Jacket too. Like you're just kind of like, why are they shooting everybody? They're just
Yeah.
shooting everybody for no reason. But I will agree with you. I think Apocalypse Now
Hmm.
probably does encapsulate the Vietnam War better than any other Vietnam War movie there is.
Like, again, when you do the research for you, like, oh, this feels like what I'm reading when you're watching it. Like everything I've read about the war so far, this is what it feels like. It's like
Yeah,
you're dramatizing everything I'm reading. I don't know. We're not saying anything that hasn't been said about this movie. I mean, it's Apocalypse Now, for crying out loud. Like it's on a lot of people's greatest movies ever lists. You know what I mean? So we're not saying
yeah,
anything like brand new. It's just how we're looking at it. I think, I don't know, that's important, right? We all process movies a little bit different. I just think that this, from a filmmaking standpoint, a performance standpoint, a theme standpoint, everything, screenplay, even though I say that it's not really written, I just think that
yeah,
everything is, it's all to a point. It all ties
yeah,
in. There's nothing like superfluous in the theatrical version that's like, oh, that was had nothing to do with what the movie I'm watching. Like again, everything, even the points where I too kind of get bored, they're kind of mimicking that. And again, I hate being that guy, Johnny. I hate being the guy that says, oh, it's bad on purpose. I don't want to do that, because I think that's really just a cop out. But yeah, I just think everything about this movie mimics, what the filmmakers intended for you to feel.
yeah, yeah. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Cool. Is there anything else that you want to say?
No, I think, talking about the Flight of the Valkyrie sequence, as a sequence, it's just masterful. The way that they jump on the helicopters, the way they have the trumpet sounding the call, the way that they have the sound booms. Again, the sound is just amazing,
Yeah.
ambient sound. And then it cuts out and you get the Vietnamese village, and you slowly get the sense, you hear the helicopters and they just come in, and they're, as filmmaking, it's awesome, but you're watching it kind of separated from it because it's horrific, but you're
Hmm.
still, it's invigorating as filmmaking because you're caught up in how great the filmmaking is. Like I said, there's a shot of helicopters coming up on a horizon. I'm like, how did they get that shot
I know,
without
right?
CGI? And
Yeah.
just, I think Tarantino was on a podcast where he talked about how Coppola always wanted a helicopter in the background during all the scenes, or most scenes, because it was teeming with life. And that's what Tarantino did with the Spawn Ranch sequences and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He wanted a dog all the time in the background of a shot because that
Hmm.
gives it extra life. And
Okay.
so I don't know, it's you're getting reverberations of movies from Apocalypse Now. Obviously Tarantino is going to sample, right? But like you're
Yeah.
still getting a lot of that in all these other movies. But anyway.
All right. Well, that was a good conversation, I think.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite movies, full stop. I think between the conversation and Apocalypse Now, I think watching it this time, I was like, yeah, I'm amazed by this movie. So
Well,
this is
I
one of
want
my
to
all
watch
time
it again,
favorites.
so I'm gonna have
Oh,
to watch
that
it
tells you
again.
something.
And
Right. Perfect.
all right. So what's next, Darren?
Okay, well, we haven't really mentioned it, but we're coming up on episode 100. I know
Ah,
that
yeah.
you and I have talked about doing kind of a bucket list thing, something I said I'd never do for episode 100, but we still have a couple episodes before that. I thought it would be fun to do something that we've also never done. It's amazing to me that we haven't talked about a James Bond movie yet.
Okay.
James Bond being such a big part of my childhood. Again, Godzilla, Transformers, and James Bond was my life growing up. So looking back on it, I was like, we haven't talked about a James Bond movie? What's happening? Why am I avoiding this? So we're talking 70s. Roger Moore was big. He was the Bond of the 70s. And so we'll talk about it. I've got controversial opinions on Roger Moore, but I think his best movie is The Spy Who Loved Me. So I want to talk about that one.
Okay. That
Jaws,
sounds good.
Nobody Does It Better, Carly Simon, all that stuff. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
excited to talk about that. So Spy Who Loved Me next time.
Sounds good.
All right.
Okay, then for NostalgiaCast, I'm Johnny.
And I'm Darin.
Don't get off the boat.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.